As Ed, in Ed's kind introduction, yeah, I've worked all around the world delivering large, complex, multidisciplinary projects with an increasing focus on low carbon. And I've specifically pulled out this project. This is the Blocks building in Copenhagen. For a client called Real Dania, and we started this project over 12 years ago. And it started with a pretty typical brief for a big mixed-use development. But actually what happened during the design process is COP15, the UN Sustainability Forum conference, came to Copenhagen. Copenhagen hosted it. And that radically altered the brief, actually. The client became very concerned about having a stranded or devalued asset, was very aware of the kind of the growing public concern around climate emergency. And we went back, and, at a pretty advanced stage in the design, we went back and revisited everything. And we worked to reduce the energy consumption of the building to less than half of what was stipulated by the requirements, the city requirements. And for the first time that I was aware of, we did a whole life carbon assessment. So this was about 10 years ago. And actually we set pretty aggressive targets for the time, targets that we're even struggling to hit these days. So I thought this was a really, really interesting project in terms of the influence. So, some of what's going on can happen or can have on clients and their perception of developments that they want to develop. And I think another reason for putting this up is COP26 this year or next year is going to be in Glasgow, and I think this is a real opportunity for the whole of our industry, the whole of our profession, to up the ante. Yeah, I think nobody's in doubt that there's a growing awareness of the magnitude of the problem that faces us. I think there's a recognised phenomenon now called climate anxiety, and I think there's a lot of there's such a volume of information. We need clarity, and I think we need to be leaders in producing this clarity, and we need this clarity to be really science-based, properly focused. And it's clear our biggest immediate issue is the objective to decarbonize everything towards science-based targets, 1.5 degree target for 2050. I think, as one of the other speakers has already said, we're also going to have to start to plan for the consequences of not achieving this, and what that means in terms of resilience, etc. But I don't want to talk about that in this particular session. There's a seemingly kind of growing arms race. Everybody's trying to outdo each other in terms of net zero carbon declarations, 2030, 2027, which is really, really positive. But I think there needs to be a rigor brought to this, and we're part of playing that rigor. And it needs to be, all of these declarations need to be really well informed and impactful, and not just move the problem around, not actually reduce global CO2, not be a convenient accounting tool, not rely totally on offsetting. So what specifically are some of our key clients saying in this kind of race to net zero? And we're helping many of these develop these strategies and develop them from a science-based perspective. There's a lot of focus on becoming net zero. Some of 4 key developers here are aiming to be net zero in 9 years' time, which is a really big ask, and they really need our help to work out real solutions and not simply invoke kind of offsetting as the easy out in all of this. And I genuinely think, as Ed said right in his introduction, that our clients are focused on this. They do want to do this. You know, they all have kind of children, grandchildren, and actually see the impact that they can have, and there is a genuine desire to do it, but it has to work, and I think it has to be informed. So, you know, helping them set targets that a time frame that reduce over time is really key to that, and helping them in relation to the kind of transitioning of this offset funds, you know, and how that might work to be better than just buying kind of off the shelf gold standard offsets. I think to influence our clients, we need to be kind of holistic in our perspective. We can't just be focused on the on the structure. We need credibility through kind of numbers and science, and we need way more data and case studies. And I heard very loudly kind of Margaret's point about you know, this information being shared as well. We need to understand you know, the big picture as well as owning the structural part, and we need to really drive the agenda to, you know, in terms of being clever, doing more with less, really understanding the overall kind of reduction in relation to operational, embodied and offset. So those three parameters down to what a credible version of zero will look like. As Ed mentioned in his intro, I'm Arup's partnership director for the in relation to our relationship with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. It's just a members organisation set in Geneva, or headquartered in Geneva, and it includes all players in the construction industry. As you know, the members range from Landsec, who are developers, to Skanska, builders, to Lafarge Holcim, Saint-Gobain, ArcelorMittal, and we're a knowledge partner as part of our kind of relationship there, and we want to rather than write other, you know, more pieces of kind of strategy, we've decided that we would spend our first year just developing case studies, real hard kind of, you know, data backed case studies around our projects, and the plan there is to produce these and publish them in time for the COP26 conference. I think starting to produce these case studies is a real eye-opener, actually. First of all, in how little LCA data we have, and I think exists full stop, and how fast we need to address that. And also it starts to open up kind of you know, real focus on where the drivers are. And this is a particular case study on a project in London, office building, and actually this project had a real drive in terms of embodied carbon, and I don't know, concrete and steel are becoming a bad word, but they shouldn't be. Actually, we need to embrace concrete and steel as you know, as the main construction materials that we have at the moment on scale, and we need to do much better with this. This was a great design for a post-tensioned flat slab, just sat on steel columns, 275 thick slab, post-tensioned, and the embodied carbon in that is 200 or so kilos a square meter. So I mean, really getting under the bonnet of all of that is something we need to do, and we really recognise this as a major drive in Arup, is kind of having these numbers, owning these numbers, and having these numbers equals credibility and it equals influence as well. We need to have sight of where the carbon sits. So you know, on this particular example, for instance, only 10% of the whole story is the structure, which is but you know, also where that sits in a kind of time domain is, you know, we're all aware of that, and we need to be having these conversations you know, really informed manner if we want to influence our clients, and you know, that's I think that's what we want to do. We want to own all of this information, so it really allows us to get stuck into the parts of the projects that we're not currently influencing, the really upfront stuff where we can make the big moves, the, refurbish rather than rebuild, maybe advising kind of local authorities much more from a much more informed position. And I mean, the truth is, we're having some of these conversations with clients, but we're not having anywhere near as many, and we're not being as influential as we need to be in this space where we make the biggest impact. I mean, we can impact all the way down this curve, and we are doing that. And again, going back to the previous project example, was a very good example of that, where we worked with the developer to identify what were the real drivers for them, and then we worked on the specifications of the concrete as well as the design to really move between these bands. Actually, we all need to be aware of these bands and what's driving these bands. And where they're going. I read only today that the concrete and cement industry has produced a net positive by 2050 paper, which I mean, we need to know and understand how credible that is, what that means, and where we end up in these in these ranges, because these can have a really big influence on the designs that we're specifying. And one of the things we really need to have a grasp on is and be informing clients better on, and we've done some work with British Land in this context, I believe, and then is offsetting, because at the moment, in terms of offsetting, we can pretty much offset all of the damage we do for less than 1% of the construction costs, and that's across the whole piece. So in terms of the structure, it's even more modest. And getting to a point where we're thinking about real, the real offsets and what they might look like, what the penalties might look like, and actually informing local authorities, actually, because this is the legislation is going to grow around this in terms of levying offset levies on embodied carbon as well as operational carbon. And I've shamelessly nicked this slide from Will, who is a source of inspiration to me also, as well as hopefully all of you. We need to be informing our clients much better in terms of the conversation about timber. Timber in its own right isn't necessarily the answer. It still has to be used efficiently. And we have to understand the kind of sequestration story around timber, and we really have to understand and specify for our clients what's going to happen to it at the end of life. So we need to be much clearer in the kind of timber story that we're presenting to our clients. And again, this is a plug, I guess. I think this piece of work, or these two pieces of work specifically that the institution has done over the last year, are brilliant, actually. And I think with a bit of kind of pushing, with a bit of us kind of all reading these, all having these conversations with our client, we can really embed this kind of everywhere. And I love the idea that we would have kind of targets that we set. And we discuss those targets with the client, and we show them how they're achievable. We show them how they're achievable without cost increase. And maybe also we have, so this is structure. Maybe also we work with SIBSI, we work with the SFE, the Facade Institute, we work with REBA, and everyone in our industry has one of these kind of calculators. And I really think Margaret's right as well. We need to empower everybody in the industry to be able to use all of this. So we need kind of simpler tools, and we need to be pushing for the sharing of simpler tools. So I've finished there, sorry. Maybe just take away three things from this. So understand the big picture, clarify objectives and targets, and measure and communicate kind of everything. I think the big picture is really key one as well, because no one really likes an informed fundamentalist. I think we don't want to be that. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Ailsa, as Ed said, and yeah, I'm going to talk about B Corp, which may or may not be familiar to you, but I'll go into it. So I think the first thing to say is I'm a senior engineer at Expedition Engineering, and it's owned by an employee benefit trust called the Useful Simple Trust, along with 4 other brands, and it's the Useful Simple Trust that is becoming B Corp accredited. But we're run as one business. We have one executive board, one HR team, finance team, one office, historically at least. So I'll be making lots of references to the trust during the presentation, and anything that applies to trust applies to Expedition. The next bit of admin is to explain why it's me that's presenting. Like Ed said, I was elected to be a trustee. So I sit on the trustee board and will do for 3 years. But also I am one of those young engineers that have been being referenced, and in 2050, which we've talked about a lot today as a time when targets are set for, but also a time when we may well be facing the reality of extreme heat and flooding and hunger. I will be 58, and I may look like that, I suspect, on a very good day, but from speaking with my peers, we feel that we are in a position where we knew life before climate change was such a global focus. We grew up, yeah, when people weren't talking about it so much, and it certainly didn't feel like as imminent a problem. But it's a reality that we will be facing, and in between that, we may well be best placed to develop skills and change practice of the places that we've now been working for a few years to try and make an impact. And that's something that the Trust understands and takes seriously, and that's why I was asked to present today. So back to the Trust, this is the moment that you might spot some familiar faces, that it was begun, and when it was formed, we have a Trust ethos that's been in place since this day, which is 12 years ago to the day. It's a legal obligation to work in line with the Trust ethos, and in a nutshell, it says that we will do excellent work, we'll do it in an excellent workplace, and it will be sustainable and for the good of society. So we've had a mission driving us since day one, and the kind of work we were doing at that time includes the velodrome, where there was a real focus on driving down the embodied carbon. In the Olympic Park, we also did the water strategy, and this is the wetlands area. It's apparently one of the best bird watching spots in London. And our communications design company also ran some local community engagement, which fed into the master plan, and maybe part of the reason why it's such a well embedded park, and the legacy of it has been so positive for everyone in the area. So that's the sort of stuff that the ethos has driven in the past. More recently, we've been keeping it up. This picture on the left is HS2's Old Oak Common Station in West London, where we did another exercise of stripping out embodied carbon. It was about 3,000 tonnes that we managed to get out from a roof optimisation study. We've also worked with Glasgow City Council to put together the sustainability strategy for their district regeneration framework. There's 9 areas in the centre of Glasgow that they're going to be looking at over the short, medium and long term. We help them set their sustainability strategy for that. And the bottom right is a master plan in East London that we did the engineering, sustainability, environmental strategy for, and the client wants that to be a world-leading sustainable development. So we're still being driven by our mission and doing work that helps us achieve it. This is the way that we state our purpose, that positively impactful outcomes at the end of that first paragraph. is about reducing carbon, delivering social value, and high quality resource efficient projects. It's also about increasing the climate resilience of projects that we're working on, as that becomes a more pressing need. And we are already accredited by social enterprise, which particularly reflects the delivering social value part of our impact. So for us, B Corp is about making the whole mission more visible to the outside world. It requires us to measure and report our impact, but it's also about stretching ourselves. As it says there, it's a really strict assessment. The highest standards of social and environmental impact is what it means. And so we're hoping that it will push us down into that blue bit that Ed referenced right in the introduction. And so it's a very natural fit for us, but it's also an aspirational one, and it will be demanding in the coming years, which is what we want. And for those who don't know much about B Corp, they say it's for businesses who fully embrace and strive to achieve the triple bottom line, which is people, planet, profit. It is fully aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's an assessment against those 5 categories on the right-hand side there. You get scores in each of those categories, and you can benchmark against other B Corps. And you can also see where the gaps are and then work to fill them with B Corp, providing lots of support along the way. For us, what it has meant in practice is, well, the first thing was changing the articles of association of the business. This is strongly encouraged and rewarded in the form of points on that assessment by B Corp. And it's about making the business mission more resilient to change of management or change of ownership. And although we have that trust ethos and it's a legal obligation and we've been doing it for 12 years, when the paper arrived from the executive board to the trustees, it still felt like a really big deal to embed this in the business. But it was one that we're all very happy to support and excited about what it would mean. Operationally, it has, like I said, it's helped us set goals. It's also widened our focus a bit. It's certainly pushed us forward on equality, diversity and inclusion, for example. And then on our projects, we particularly hope that it's going to help us with that influencing the brief, making sure we're getting to work with teams who share our commitment to tackling climate change, and who we can do really good work with that we can share and change the paradigm, to use an overused phrase. And just to wrap up on our experience of becoming B Corp, there's a few fairly long quotes from the beneficiaries, but the overall feeling in the trust is that it's a badge of authenticity. It's a hard one, I think, a hard-won badge of authenticity. And like it says, and Sean is a new graduate who's just joined. It will help us inspire trust. People will know that we really mean it. And it's about sharing the work we've been doing, learning from others, and working on great projects to improve or increase our impact. And the final thing I wanted to say was, well, to give you all an action to take away. The B Corp assessment I've been talking about is available for free on their website. It says there it takes 90 minutes. And even if you're not at all interested in becoming a B Corp or it's way off, it's really useful. We found it a really useful tool to understand our performance and understand where we can develop. So I would encourage everybody to go on there and have a look and have a go at the assessment and just see how you do. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for inviting me to speak. And I think I'm the only non-engineer in the room, virtual room. So I'll try and keep any jokes aside. Okay, so as Ed said, I just want to spend the next 10 minutes just talking to you about my experience, both within a large corporate environment at BAM, so leading the sort of effort to become more sustainable, and working on various projects along the way, and also how, importantly, how we derived value for the client and for stakeholders involved. And that was one of the key things that we sort of noticed, or I noticed very early on in my career, that as an architect, it's very easy to sort of go and draw something, but when you're talking about sustainability, often you need to prove the concept. You need to prove through science, through scientific measures, through modeling, etc., that actually what you're doing has a long-term value. And that sort of approach has followed my career through BAM as well, where actually going into a boardroom and preaching about saving the world or saving the planet doesn't always go down that well. But when you can back it up with sound evidence to say, actually, by doing X, Y, or Z, you're reducing costs, you're increasing your efficiency, you're going to add value to your clients' assets, etc., that actually then adds value to the conversation, as well as then saying you're reducing waste or reducing CO2. So we've all seen this picture taken 52 years ago now, probably the first well-known picture of the Earth from the moon, but it reminds us that we only have one planet, and we need to take care of it. And also here, you can see, it's not really a picture that we like to see, but ultimately we do have a linear economy at the moment. And again, there are things as designers that we can do to think about how we're designing products, services, etc., to avoid that linear economy route where we're thinking about secondary uses or next life instead of dealing with business as usual. And then the result is that we're sort of passing on our waste issue or a carbon issue to other people. Fortunately, and I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but a lot of the speakers this morning have spoken about the change that's here now. There's a lot of different guidance, and I think that's one of the issues that all of these different companies, organizations, etc., are coming up with their own climate emergency, their own action plan. And I think someone said it earlier, we need to start being more joined up and start thinking about how can we tackle this together. And I think that's one of the solutions that we need to get to. So what's happening in practice? Just over the last few months, I've had a bit more time than usual, as some of you may have as well. But there's a lot of talk about doing things in a different way. I'm also involved in the Construction Innovation Hub's Value Toolkit project, and that's helping the industry to start thinking about value in a different way. And that's really how I want to present this talk, in that business as usual isn't good enough. We need to start rethinking business models. We need to start thinking about different alliances, different ways of working. And on the right hand side, you can see that and I'm very into promoting natural materials, modern methods of construction, but also the circular economy, but also the value that can bring. And I've seen from talking to clients that I've worked with in the Netherlands mainly, where actually they can see that you're adding value to their asset by changing the materials, by looking at design for not just disassembly, but for reassembly as well. And then suddenly you're starting to talk to suppliers in a different way to incentivize them to do different things. So just a flashback at one of the projects that I was involved in with BAM Construct. This was about 7 years ago. It was for Google. So we won the job to develop the pre-construction services for them. And then we quickly realized that as we were working on the job, they wanted to target the Living Building Challenge, they wanted to target LEED, BREEAM, embodied carbon metrics, etc. But when we looked at the drawings and we're sort of tendering, we're thinking, well, this doesn't make sense, because, you know, actually they're saying that they want to do X, Y, and Z, but actually not following through. So, you know, the sustainability consultants within these firms at the bottom, you know, we sort of became a team, you know, and we really did start to, you know, understand what was missing and give the client feedback on, you know, how can we be more joined up? How can we produce a methodology that starts to talk about all of these issues that, you know, you as a client are concerned about, but then reach out through workshops and engage with stakeholders at the early stages of a project to make sure that, you know, the specific requirements are actually taken account of, and then we can track that through, you know, the project. So that was a learning curve for all of us, but also it showed that, you know, by working together, you know, you can actually make a change. And then just to highlight a few projects, not in detail, some of the projects that I've been exposed to or involved in, the Circular House in London, that was with Arup, and the Built Environment Trust and Frenner and Reifer back in 2017, I think. And that was a prototype building just to work with our supply chain to try and get materials and start thinking or designing for that reuse in mind. So you're not just designing for disassembly, but you're thinking, how do I make this waterproofing work? And, you know, how does it weather? How do I then reassemble that somewhere else in future? So it was a very good learning curve, very good experience to work on. But then I think, you know, one of the key things that we learned, you know, from talking to clients is that one of the key value drivers that we found for clients was that residual value. When you're talking about circular economy, residual value of those materials, if you're designing something, so you could probably see the third picture from the top. It was the Circle Pavilion for ABN AMRO in Amsterdam. And that, along with other projects that we've worked on, you know, we're able to demonstrate that added value, able to demonstrate that if you go for, let's say, a timber structure instead of a timber structure, which is, let's say, you know, bolted connections instead of welded steel or concrete, you'd be able to reuse certain components again. And it wasn't just about the structure, but also about the interfaces with the ceilings, the cladding, the roof, floors, etc., and how you can use materials that, you know, have possibly been used, you know, previously. But, you know, we maintained a very simple aesthetic, you know, whereby we didn't cover things up because they were slightly tarnished, or, you know, the fire hose reel was slightly damaged, but did it matter? No, not really. So this all added to that story of, you know, actually putting something together and being honest with it as well. And I suppose the key thing here is, you know, we learned very quickly that, you know, different members of the value chain had to be incentivized to do, you know, to sort of look at circularity in a different way. And, you know, often the first response that we got from suppliers and manufacturers was, no, I can't do this. So we had to put together this model whereby we were able to, you know, incentivize the value chain to sort of look at, you know, whole life costs and, you know, look at value in a different way. And also working in the Netherlands a lot, they have a different form of tender or tendering over there. It's called MV scoring. And it was really enlightening to think that, you know, actually a large contractor is incentivized to put forward innovations. So if you say, you know, you're tendering for a job that's worth, you know, your tender goes in at 100 million, for example, but you've got 20% of that, which are sustainable innovations, which are looking at long-term value, your bid actually goes in as a discounted rate at 80 million. And more often than not, BAM would win those jobs because we were able to invest in, you know, that long-term thinking and actually give the client added value. So that's again something that I hope we can bring over to the UK because I think that would just change the mindsets of how, you can incentivize people to actually look for those long-term costs. And, I think, because you're focused in the UK, we're focused so much on lowest cost. Designers, contractors, etc., developers only look at that as the metric. And I really believe that, we all want to provide that added value. We all want to have more fun when we're working. We all want to look at innovation in a different way. We just need to be incentivized to do that in a better way. One of the projects that we worked on in the Netherlands is still, ongoing. It's on site now. BAM bought the land for 84 million euros. It's based in Amsterdam. It's a former prison. And again, 50% of the bid was based on land acquisition, but also on scoring the non-financial metrics. So looking at the qualitative aspects of environment, social, what's the social value that we're adding, what are the circular solutions. So looking at a very, boring concrete block, I think there were 5 blocks actually, we're actually incentivized to now we've committed to, we as in BAM, have committed to providing, as many sustainable solutions for the site as possible, retaining 98% of the existing asset. And hence we're now trying to figure out ways to reuse the steel jail bars as balconies and bridges. We're thinking about how can we reuse concrete that's on the site rather than just downcycle that as aggregate or sub-base. We're actually looking at, making that into concrete again or cement again. And it's really about how do you retain value after something's been built for the first time. So yeah, we're really looking at sustainable solutions. And then moving on from that, just very quickly, again, we've had, or BAM have had, various successes where they've been able to say that they've, provided the first climate positive road, or they've got an X block, which is, for retention of, flood resilience, etc. So it has given BAM the opportunity to become leaders in different fields because they've innovated solutions for projects, but ultimately that they can sell on again. I think there was another project where, we had to maintain the road. We had to build a section of the A12 motorway in the Netherlands, and we had to build it and maintain it for 25 years. And essentially we're only being paid for the number of lanes open at any given time. So we put sensors in the road surface to make sure that we can monitor and proactively manage that road surface. What we didn't realize at the time was that the unintended consequence of that was that we had tire manufacturers actually asking for that data from us. So again, it just goes to show that that business model innovation works, but often, that the consequences of that are outside of your own field. So developing a sustainability strategy within the company, and I don't need to go through all of these, but it's really looking at, prioritizing, looking at easy wins, putting a strategy together so that everyone understands sustainability, and making it very clear that, you need to do X, Y, and Z in the next year, or 5 years, or 10 years. And then at Insight Futures, one of the consultancies that I'm working with, we're really looking at how we can, develop the ecosystem to make change. And that's not just about putting the donor economics model into practice or looking at, a circular solution or a roadmap, but it's about, putting together that ecosystem and driving change through disruptive innovation. And so some of the things that I'll leave you with is, we're looking at a collaboration model where we can understand the ecosystem, understand the problems that need to be solved around a given city. So currently we're talking to Glasgow and Circular Glasgow and the Chamber of Commerce about actually creating that ecosystem and taking people on a journey so that we're actually creating live solutions and ahead of COP26 next year. And to create that alignment of shared vision, look at different business models, to set simple goals and pilot projects where we can actually say, look, we've achieved, a certain amount of waste saving or CO2 reductions because we've done something differently, but also to celebrate the wins. And ultimately, I suppose it's to create that industrial symbiosis. So I think I've got one slide left, which is just a quote that I came across. And again, it's really just thinking about, looking at things in a different way. I think a lot of people talk about selling products, and I think we need to start thinking about services and how we can monetize that sharing economy where, actually we can provide value if we do things in a different way. Thank you very much.
I'm personally very excited to be here. I'm in the United States, and we are keen on what the iStructD is doing, particularly in climate change. So, sorry about that. The way, speaking of adjusting the project brief, personally, I found it to be most successful by having perspective on both the national and the local level. So on the national level, as a volunteer at the Structural Engineering Institute and chair of the SC 2050 commitment, I'm able to talk to colleagues all around the country. The United States is a very big country, and the way this problem is approached is highly variable in different regions. And then taking that information and applying it on the local level as a practicing structural engineer at measure. So I really think that both of these perspectives sort of communicate with one another, and they both can help impact the project brief, both locally and nationally. And I would encourage people that are not engaged on the national level to find a way to join a committee, because I think it really does open up a perspective that could be missing locally. So the UK has the Structural Engineers Declare Climate and Biodiversity Emergency, and this is pretty exciting. I do want to mention here that this is the slide that I and my group included in a presentation to the Structural Engineering Institute when we were pitching them on our own idea, and this really. Although we do not currently have our own structural engineers declare, this declare on the UK side has really helped us in the United States push our current commitment, our current climate commitment, which is the SC 2050 commitment program. And it is focused on embodied carbon, so we do not explicitly mention biodiversity, although that is clearly a critical piece of the puzzle. But we are focused on reducing embodied carbon in our structural systems by 2050. And it is a true commitment where we're asking firms to sign up and engage. Not so different than what you guys are doing with the Structural Engineers Declare, but we're sort of a slightly different approach. So we are modeling our program after the American Institute of Architects 2030 commitment program, which was focused on operational energy. And so their goals is to establish a net zero operational carbon or operational energy by 2030 by tracking and setting targets over time. So what we're doing for SC 2050 is very similar. And the goal is to track the embodied carbon impact of our structural systems in different parts of the country, and establish benchmarks and eventual targets for reduction. So the plots that Will and his group were showing on establishing targets is something that we're very interested in, and I think there's definitely an area of collaboration between SEI and iStructD, particularly in this area. The basics of the program follow under, call it 3 buckets: plan, implement, and share. And again, a lot of the tenets in here are in your Structural Engineers Declare. The first step under the plan is creating an embodied carbon action plan, or ECAP as we're calling it. And this is really to I don't want to say force, but encourage your office to support your staff with education around embodied carbon, as well as understanding and following through on tracking of the structural material quantities and global warming potential of your systems, implementing sort of sustainability best practices on projects through LCA methods, in engaging in the sustainability goals of each project that you're on. So really trying to get yourself out in front. And then finally sharing, which is going back to the process of sharing your data and tracking and sort of forcing your firm and your engineer to understand the impacts of their structural system. So one thing I should say is tracking and establishing a huge database of information will take years. But we're hoping that the process of just going through and supplying the information will force the structural engineer and the respect in your office to understand the method. Okay, so it is, you know, partially about understanding the national impacts of your structural system, but also forcing the individual engineer to understand and calculate. So here are the program requirements. Basic program requirements, there's 3 of them. So number 1, you have to have a firm leader, you know, vice president or director or higher, sign a commitment letter and submit it to SEI. That's sort of the easy part. The second part is within 6 months, you're creating an embodied carbon action plan. And I'm probably breaking every rule with slide production by putting a lot of words on the screen, but really just want to focus in on the 4 main topics, which is education, reporting, embodied carbon reduction strategies, and advocacy, and sort of bringing it back to impacting the project brief. If we can get the national organization of structural engineers to follow this, then I think collectively as a mass, we will start to impact the individual project briefs. So this is really about coalescing all of these ideas and developing a consistent approach across the country. And then finally, number 3 is providing the data to the database. I literally just threw this slide in here because Margaret reminded me, and I've heard others say this, is that they want very simple tools. So we agree, very much so. We agree. We don't want to overthink or overanalyze this problem of assessing the embodied carbon. So we have a very basic tool called Ecom, which is nothing more than a glorified spreadsheet of industry average values, but you can go in and plug in basic structural material quantities, and you'll get the industry average impacts associated with them. Bringing it back to the US, I don't know if this is exactly what's happening in the UK, but I can tell you in the US, there's almost like a 2 curves, right? One curve is the incredible energy and enthusiasm and understanding of you know, climate change and the need to reduce the embodied carbon of your structural systems, given the significant impact of the structural system, and that would be represented by curve A. This is a this is a highly scientific plot, I should say. And curve B is sort of where we're at right now in the profession, you know, ranging anything from what is embodied carbon to how do I measure it, how do I reduce it, you know, how much is this going to cost? And the thing I talk about a lot is the standard of care and making sure that all the structural engineers are sort of pulling on the same oar, in the sense that we're employing these new strategies, but we're sort of doing it together so that we're setting a standard of care within your jurisdiction and even on the country level. I added that 3rd curve dash line because as I'm watching this conference, I realized that we are starting to close the gap, although there is a lot of work to be done. We are starting to get in the US, you know, we're getting a lot of emails that look like this. This is an email from an architect that simply says, can you give me some basic numbers on embodied carbon of a commercial lab building? I need something with a little bit of meat on it. And so it's less about the kind of greenwashing big picture. They actually want some real numbers. And so as a structural engineer, we need to be prepared to do that. Talking about the change in the paradigm in the office. I guess because the picture's showing up, it's right in front of us. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is somewhat of call her my hero, one of my heroes, and she unfortunately just passed. She was a Supreme Court justice in our judiciary, And I like her expression, in every good marriage, it helps sometimes to be a little deaf. And so if we use that expression as you're trying to change the paradigm of your office or even with your clients, I think it's important to somewhat ignore some of the pushback or the negative feedback you might receive and just keep forging forward. Another big aspect of changing the paradigm is something that Mike Cook said during his gold medal speech, and that is finding your allies and really working with them and making sure that you found those people that will help move your message along and break through some of the barriers. And then I would say it's really important that the structural engineer, if you're trying to change the paradigm in your office, you are making the business case. You are conveying to business leadership why this is important on a business scale. I threw this slide in here is because sometimes when you're changing the paradigm, you have to start from the very beginning. So this is one of the first slides I showed my office a number of years ago to really sort of get back to the basics. This was an aha moment that I wanted to create for the office, where it's a simple frame. And I don't know about the impacts in the UK, but an HSS or hollow tube section versus a wide flange is twice as impactful. And so if we had a simple bracing scheme and you did a comparison, in this case, I found that the tube section was 20% lighter, right? So less tonnage, which is good. However, it's 30%, 37% more impactful on the embodied carbon side. So that having that in your mind and sharing with your office is a very simple problem to sort of get the message across in a super simple way, but it'll stick in the back of their minds. When it comes to changing the paradigm in the office, it's taken a number of years, but we've been able to organize, call it a sustainability planning group. And it's really important to be organized because this is a new field, embodied carbon and climate change, relatively new, I should say, for our firm. And so it's really important to be organized. And so that allows us to be ready to answer some of those questions that we're getting from our architecture colleagues. And more importantly, I think it needs to be fun and exciting. It can't seem to be like a drain on your energy. And so it's important to identify the colleagues, or should say, you make sure that your colleagues want to do it on their own. Okay, so finding the people that are interested in particular topics and leveraging that energy. This was simply my attempt to say that influencing the project brief, it's so important that the structural engineer gets out in front of this, and the structural engineer and the design team are touching all of the different circles of impact on the project brief, whether it's the green rating scheme, the owners, the contractors, the institutions. There are conversations, and they must happen early, and they must happen often. Here, I simply was trying to make a point that what we have found, or what I have found, and what I've observed in the US is that the owner, having an engaged owner, somebody who's willing to sort of push down some of the barriers to get to those embodied carbon reductions is so important. And the point here is that you can have a design team that's informed and influential. It really is best to have focus that energy on an engaged owner with the ultimate goal of getting that engaged owner to sort of help the unengaged owner sort of be able to break down their own barriers and assess ways to overcome some of those things that perhaps are holding them back and making some of these embodied carbon reductions. I'll just say very quickly, one of the successes we've had is working with an engaged owner very early in a project. This is an institution here in Boston, and we were able to get a significant reduction in embodied carbon. But I can tell you that it required many meetings, and more meetings than I had ever really been a part of in a project. And surprisingly, they were productive, right? You say more meetings, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be productive. But what was really helpful too is that we came to the meeting having done a life cycle assessment of the project. And when you show the numbers in front of the owner, in front of the contractor, and in front of the architect, and you show them with actual evidence, these are the numbers, and you equate it to some you know, driving around the earth 400 times or a plane flying continuously for a month, then they start to get it. So you know, the structural engineer's role, I think, is changing a bit, and we've got to sort of get out in front and take the lead on some of these things. This is another thing that's very important on the structural engineering side, is giving early project assessments of different structural systems. This is actually design competition, and we weren't specifically asked to do this, but we started because we knew the owner. We were trying to somewhat educate the owner. We threw up a comparison between a steel frame building and a timber frame building, very easy to read, and just making some general comparisons between the two systems. And that elicited a conversation after the design competition, and then that led to another thing, So another thing is that if you're going to do studies, try to do studies with your allies, and always remember the next project. So here's a particular study we were doing that wasn't a real project, but we made sure that whatever we were going to put in front of our client had global warming potential or embodied carbon in it. So this was an assessment of an interior bay framing for different vibration criteria, and they were interested in structural depth, so they could run their MEPs above or through the structure. And we made sure to include global warming potential, which then led to another conversation, and so on and so forth. But it hasn't all been roses. So I will say I've had some fails too. So here is one where I was trying to salvage some steel beams from a project that was going to be demolished and replaced with a steel frame building. And this was for a residential developer who respectfully said, no, we're not going to do this. It's too much money. We don't see the value in doing it. And I won't get into all the lessons learned, but it's very important to look at what hasn't worked and make sure that you learn from it and move forward. And again, ignore the noise. Okay, so just keep forging ahead. I just want to briefly say, as I'm getting close to the end here, there are some barriers to entry that we've observed. Number one, the market demand does not seem to be matching the industry momentum. I was on a call yesterday with Owens Corning, and they said, we don't understand what's going on. We have all these amazing products, but no one's willing to pay for them. Now, that's a very, I don't want to say that that's consistent across the whole profession, but that was surprising to me. And then quickly, I'll say, specific to this presentation, the unprepared design teams to relatively quickly provide embodied carbon feedback is huge. You're going to get that question early, and they're going to want a quick turnaround, and you've got to be prepared for it. And then trying to knock down that perception that it's always more expensive to lower the embodied carbon of a structure. And finally, this is an email from a concrete supplier or somebody that supplies to a concrete supplier. And they really, they were struggling because that particular concrete supplier was doing very well economically, very, very busy, and they couldn't find the pain point to enter their market. And I'll just wrap up by saying, I think we're in a positive way. I want to end this on a positive note. We are making a lot of progress. We've got to keep pushing. We've got to really, really keep pushing. And if I could leave with one thing, that is, don't wait to have that conversation. Don't be afraid to have that conversation. The structural engineer's opinion carries a lot of weight, and we should be out in front of it. And I like to consider everything that we're doing as a major opportunity. So I do want to just thank you for the opportunity. I apologize for going over my 10 minutes. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions.
I'm going to start with the question at the top of the list with the most votes, which is one about early engagement and the importance of early engagement. The point being made that many schemes in the UK, at least, up to planning, there's very little structural input, and by the time we get on board, a lot of the decisions about refurb versus new build and floor-to-floor heights and so on have already been made, and too late for us to influence. And the question is really, is it reliant on cultural change as an industry, or can we lobby for tighter legislative change? So who would like to tackle that? Chris, maybe I can direct that at you to begin with, as you pick this up in your talk too.
Yeah, no, sure. I think it's a good point. I think we have to not wait for the projects, actually. We have to be more vocal in an ongoing kind of conversation with clients around this topic, informed conversation and influence them through kind of broader knowledge, data, clarity. I'm starting to see, and I imagine other people are starting to see, the emergence of LCA consultants jumping into this space, and that worries me actually, because I sat in a meeting only yesterday where somebody was telling me about embodied carbon from a perspective that wasn't informed. They weren't a professional, they weren't an engineer, they weren't in charge of the design, and I think we have to move into that space much more aggressively, I think, for want of a better word, and be really informed in how we do that, and it shouldn't equate to additional cost. I mean, doing good should also be cost effective, and I think we have to have those conversations up front with clients. I mean, let's get out there and talk to them more.
Thanks, Chris. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? How does it work in the US, Michael? Do you find the same sort of frustration that oftentimes when you get brought on board on projects that some of these big moves have already been made?
Yeah, absolutely. I would double down on what Chris was saying. I think one of the biggest issues is that it's very late in the game, and then the only thing you can really do is impact the concrete mixes and reduce the embodied carbon that way. I would just add to what Chris said that by having the early conversations and you know, it's not changing your workflow that much. It's literally when you're on the call with a prospective client, you just also happen to mention, hey, will they be including an assessment of embodied carbon on this project? And I think it's just about planting the seeds and like just bringing these terms into the normal conversations that are happening already. So we're not talking about major changes in the discussion. It just has to happen earlier. That would be my opinion.
Thank you, Michael. On the changing legislation point, it sort of relates also to the second question. The second question here is around tax. It's around the specific issue of taxation, I think, on refurbishment in the UK, and not on new build, leading to greater demolition than we'd like to see. The suggestion is about whether we do a poll in the final session here to around that particular issue of taxation. I'll leave that to Mike to decide whether that's something we want to do at the end of the conference. But I think there's a broader issue here for me around legislation. Is this tax the key issue here, or is it around a carbon tax, a general carbon tax like the one that from the news headline last Friday, or where would be the biggest, what legislative or policy change would make the biggest difference?
I can start if nobody. Nitesh, you look like you're leaning into the camera now.
Yeah, I don't mind taking that one. And you know, whilst I'm very much in favour of carrot rather than stick, I think you need a combination. And again, going back to my experience from the Netherlands, you can see that, you know, the whole ecosystem and the industry have got behind hitting targets around zero use of raw materials by 2050, because there's a clear incentive or a clear drive from the government that they want you to achieve that, and they didn't necessarily give you the playbook from day one. But you know, I've seen that companies were actually trying to focus on reaching that goal, that ultimate goal, to change things, because ultimately they knew that, you know, in 5 years' time, for example, if we don't start now, we're going to be behind. So, you know, there's been a lot of work around looking at whole life cycle costs, whole life carbon, and that was legislated, you know, 5-6 years ago in the Netherlands. And those conversations have moved into how can I use whole life costing or whole life carbon to demonstrate how I can reuse materials or think about material use for longer, etc. So yeah, I think that's something we're lacking in the UK, is expecting industry just to get behind it. And, it's great to have, everyone declaring a climate emergency, but I think ultimately, we need clients to have a bit of a push as well.
Can I add to that? Is that okay?
Of course, Chris.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the time we knock buildings down because somebody can get more value out of them. And I think you've got to change that equation. And I'm not sure whether just, VAT or tax or whatever will do that. One thing that you could have is a CO2 kind of plot ratio, if you like. We have plot ratios for square meters in lots of places where we build, but you could quite easily have a CO2 plot ratio, or you could have a legislation that you don't get extra square meters unless you keep the existing or you achieve a particular CO2. And that then would be the incentive, that you can have extra, but you've got to keep the existing, and repurpose it in a thoughtful way, and you've got to achieve a certain carbon target.
I think any instrument, however blunt, that increases the cost of building unsustainably, it will disincentivize those practices, because we still have projects where the sustainable option gets thrown out because of budget early on, and it's not possible to bring it back onto the table. So yeah, I don't have a specific suggestion either, but anything that makes it more expensive not to be thinking about carbon and trying to minimize your impact has got to have an effect.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of incentivizing better and good behavior, not just taxing the bad stuff.
So more carrot than stick, or at least
some
carrot, not all stick.
Yeah, you can go as high as you want, but as long as you reach this target and keep the existing.
The one thing I would add on the U.S. side is the focus on legislation right now has been on the state level, and the way they're approaching it in California and to a certain extent in Washington State and New York State is through the public project realm and establishing global warming potential limits for awarding contracts for public projects. And that's really been the focus on the legislation front right now. So it hasn't been so much a tax as it's been, well, we're only going to award you a project if you get your global warming potential number to a certain level.
Thank you, Michael. Just moving on. The next question here is around, I think is linked to this kind of being brought on board too late issue. I think it's particularly from the perspective of domestic projects, but I think we've tackled that to an extent already. So I'm going to skip over that if that's okay. There's a couple of others here I'd really like us to touch on. The next one is around, with various institutions and many other bodies giving consideration to these matters, how can the industry come together to do things one vision, one way? And I think this is a really important point, and it's certainly something, Nitesh, that you spoke to about the value of us being more joined up in our approach here, whether that's at an institution level or just as a profession, perhaps. Do you have any thoughts on that as to what more we could do to be better joined up?
I think someone mentioned earlier that, and it's, everyone talks about getting the contractor involved earlier. It's not just the contractor, but having those roundtable discussions with everyone involved so that you can reach a consensus on looking at sustainable solutions, but also marrying that up against cost as well, so that you're evaluating cost, quality. When you're thinking about different solutions, you should be thinking about the air tightness, water tightness, fire proofing, etc., and circularity index. How can you create buildings that are operationally fit for purpose and that have that long lifespan? And I don't think we do that enough. So I think a different procurement model is probably needed, where it forces us to contract with each other, an alliance framework or something that encourages. It's all very good having a circular model or a collaborative model if only the contracts that we're using are still directly one-to-one with the client, and it incentivize us to change our behavior. So I think there's a lot around, not just doing things on a project, but how we engage in our services as well need to change.
Thank you, Nitesh. Ailsa, I wonder if I could ask for your take on this question. I mean, it seems to me that the declarations are one way of making sure that we're all joined up, and under the construction declares umbrella, if we as the signed up structural engineers are talking to architects declare and those other parts of the industry that have those declarations, that should help to join us up in our approach. It's interesting that the Useful Simple Trust has also gone for B Corp, if you like, accreditation as another, and it seems another mechanism to kind of be joined up with like-minded allies. How do you think that those things relate to each other? I mean, do you think that we should be doing more than can be done just through the declaration networks as a way of joining up?
Yes. I hesitate because I'm not sure exactly. I don't know if I can picture what a fully joined up industry looks like, or even structural engineering practices being fully joined up in their approach. But the more we can learn from other people's experience and the barriers they've been facing and how they got over them, like Michelle's presentation where she talked about upskilling the local timber industry, makes you realize it's possible. So the more we have of that, surely the better, the faster we will learn and develop our practice.
Thank you, Ailsa. It links into one final question from here from Molly Broadbent again, who asks, what are the big, possibly awkward questions we as companies who have declared have to ask ourselves, and how can we support each other to ask those questions? Would anybody like to tackle that? What are the big questions? What are the awkward questions?
I think there is a, if I can start, there is a big, really awkward question is, are we moving fast enough? Are we actually, achieving what we want to achieve? And I think that's why I really love the work that's been done at the iStruct in terms of starting to set targets and stuff like that, because I think until you actually have hard numbers and targets, you don't really know what you're achieving. And until we all start sharing kind of what good looks like more, we don't know what we're achieving actually. So, I mean, our feeling is we're making progress, but I think we really want to be harder and more clinical about how we measure that.
Anna, is there anything we should be doing or could be doing to hold each other to account within organisations or across the profession? I mean, I think being candid with each other at events like this, is a good way for us to really, come together as a profession. But could we do more?
I think we can. I think we need to be challenging each other. I think someone said that earlier, but also challenging the client as well. Even if we're given a brief and it's not necessarily sustainable, I think we should be asking those key questions, which are, would you like a zero carbon building or an asset? Would you like a circular development? And if nothing else, that promotes the fact that you're willing, you're able to do it, and you're willing to provide those solutions. And it's really a case of changing short-termism into how can we provide you long-term value. And I don't know any client that's not really willing to listen to that. It may be that they're, again, going back to what are they contractually obliged, or what's their remit to provide a development that works, or is it just you've got to provide this to the lowest cost, etc. So we need to get to the bottom of how do you, again, incentivize people to think long term, even if it's not in their job profile to deliver a product that lasts 25 years or 60 years or 100. They should be thinking about that value and just joining up the different sort of parts of their business to provide that.